Thank you. Good evening. This public forum on the redistricting for single member District 5 is now called to order at 6 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, March 21st, 2022 for the purposes stated in the notice for tonight's meeting. Board members present. I do not see any board. David Vogt has logged on remotely. Do not see any board members in the room. Let me look at the list one more time. Trustee Vogt and myself and the two trustees present. I'd like to welcome and thank Dr. Head for being present tonight on location, and also like to thank the OTS team. And I think we ought to coin a phrase for OTS: always there or always here. One of the two. Maybe it's both. But anyway, thanks for all the assistance. And also like to thank our campus president for Lone Star College, Montgomery. I wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone tonight. There's no public posting for the meeting required by a quorum. So our first order of business is a presentation by our legal and demographic team concerning what redistricting is, the role census data plays in redistricting, the system's census data for 2010 and 2020, and initial proposed maps. I'd like to ask Trustee Vogt to do a count, a 1, 2, 3 count, so we know he can access the meeting. Trustee Vogt, if you would do that, please unmute yourself. Paige, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you hear Trustee Vogt? Okay. You can hear me, but we do not hear him, correct? Okay.
My apologies, Trustee Sullivan. Currently, we have a position set for Trustee Vogt, but he has not arrived or is not here. We currently do not see him virtual either.
Okay, I do, not to argue with you, looking at participants list, there are 13. And I see Trustee Vogt's name right below Board Council 3 and right above Lisa McBride. But not arguing, just pointing that out. Yes, sir, I see you there.
I understand this is the spot that we reserved for him, but if he showed up in person, but he is not here.
Okay, very good. Then let the record reflect that. Ms. McBride and Mr. Gardner, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Trustee Sullivan. If we'll go to the first slide, welcome everyone who's joining us in person and online. We're happy to have you. Today's objectives are to give a legal overview regarding redistricting, then to talk more specifically about the population change analysis that drives the redistricting work. Because redistricting is the process of rebalancing single member districts, it's important to know what the population change has been in between decennial censuses, so we know where we have to balance in order to get more equal population. And then the way we rebalance our population is by moving the boundaries between single member districts. And there are some constraints on how we do that. And those constraints come from a consent decree, a legal requirement that is binding on Lone Star College system, as well as some redistricting criteria. Think of those as map drawing principles that were adopted by the board as part of the redistricting process. Then we'll look at some proposed maps 1 and 2. Where we're continuing to receive trustee feedback and public feedback, and that will result in the generation of new maps that we will come back out to the public and share with the public as well. So a continual iterative process regarding map drawing. And then we'll tell you about the next steps and timelines. Next slide, please. So a brief legal overview so that we're all on the same page is what is redistricting. The technical definition is the process by which the elective units of a governmental entity, such as a college system, are redrawn in response to changes in population. Those changes in population are recorded and disseminated to states and entities like ours through the federal census, which is done once every 10 years. It's done on an even year mark mark like 2020 or 2010 or 2030, and the following odd year like 2021 is when the data is released. And then we have a requirement to respond to that data within a specific time period. If you'll go to the next slide. So talking about the elective units of an entity such as ours, those elective units are called single member districts. And on slide 5, that is on your screen right now, we have the current single member district boundaries for the Lone Star College system. And as I indicated, the purpose of redistricting is to balance population. So I want to point something out. You see 9 single member districts there, but you see there are of different sizes. We're not talking about the physical size of the district. We're talking about the people who reside within it. So single member district 7, when this was drawn in 2013, is physically larger than the other single member districts, but its population size is equivalent, not exactly equal, but equivalent to the other single member districts. But that's based on information that we had in 2013. It's been more than 7 years since then. We've received census data in 2021. And so now we have to rebalance these lines based on what that census data tells us, which single member district is the largest, which one is the smallest, and how do we get them more equal? That is our task in the redistricting process. Each one of these single member districts is represented by a trustee that represents you. Currently, there is 1 vacancy in single member district number 7. If you'll go to the next slide, you have your current trustees. And why this process is important to both trustees and you as members of the community is when we're redrawing the boundaries of single member districts, that means we are shifting what voters are in and out of individual single member districts. So that affects who's eligible to vote for a particular representative. And then for you as community members, it affects who you're eligible to vote for and who is your representative. Very important things in local government. Next slide. As part of this process, it's not only being driven by the full board, but in particular with laser focus, the Redistricting Committee. You heard a wonderful welcome by the chair of the committee, Trustee Mike Sullivan from District 8, but other members of the committee include Trustee Ernestine Pierce from Single Member District 2 and Art Murillo from Single Member District number 4. That is our 3-member single member district who will be meeting actually this Thursday to take in feedback that we're getting from trustees and the community with respect to maps 1 and 2, which we'll talk about tonight, in order to make additional recommendations to the board about moving forward on the next iteration of maps before we go back out to the public. Next slide. So now we know what redistricting is, that it involves the elective units of our college system that are represented by individual trustees who must reside within those boundaries, and that changing those boundaries in order to respond to population changes really means that we are changing folks who live within and without a particular single member district. And so what triggers this process is when we get our census data every 10 years, if the difference between the most populous and least populous single member district, not the largest, physically largest and physically smallest, but we're talking about total population size. If the difference between those two is greater than 10%, then we must rebalance coming back under that 10% threshold. So that's the trigger for knowing that we must respond to the census data in order to bring our system back into balance. And if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the timeline for doing that. So state law says that we have to complete this process 90 days before the first election at which we can implement this census data and redistricting plan. Your system has its next election November 8th of 2022. 90 days before that is August 10th. So that's the statutory deadline to complete redistricting. But August 10th of 2022 is sandwiched between 2 important dates. The first day day for a candidate to file for a place on the ballot, which is in the middle of July, and the last day to file for a place on the ballot, which is in the middle of August. And remember, I said that in order to seek election to represent a community, a trustee must reside, or a candidate must reside within a single member district. So by the first day to file, mid-July, your trustees want to have completed this process so that any candidate seeking a place on the ballot for the November of 2022 election will know the boundaries within which he or she must reside in order to represent that community. So it was very important to the board that we not complete this process by August 10th, which is the deadline, but we do so well in advance of the first day to file for a candidate for a place on the ballot, which is the mid-July. So we're going to complete this process by the end of June. That is well in advance of both of those filing deadlines and well in advance of the August 10th absolute statutory deadline to complete this process. You'll go to the next slide. So we've kind of telegraphed a little bit that what redistricting is, what triggers it, when we have to get it done, and how is it done? It's really done by taking our current boundaries and assessing our census data that tells us the folks that are residing within those boundaries. How do we move those boundaries around in order to come back under that 10% threshold with a focus towards being of more equal population? Under the 10% threshold, more equal population throughout all of your single member districts. But there are going to be some constraints on how we do that, and we'll talk about those constraints in a moment. If you go to the next slide. So I've talked a little bit about what drives this process, this rebalancing process that we go through every 10 years is the census data that is released by the federal government. And that data is released in particular jurisdictional sizes. We call a census block as the smallest one, and we build up from there. But what we get about those different jurisdictional areas is we get a total population information, we get voting age information, and then based on survey data, as well as census data and other government records over periods of time, we get an estimate of citizen voting age population. If you'll go to the next slide. To give you a more of a definition of those three numbers. Total population, as it relates to the current census, means all persons, those over 18, those under 18, those who are citizens, those who are not, all persons residing within the jurisdiction as of April 1st, 2020. That's a direct count number based on how people completed their census, counting those people where they said they reside, how many persons they said resided in their household. Voting age population is another direct count number, and it's a smaller number than total population because we're only counting the number of persons who were 18 years of age or older on April 1 of 2020. Again, a direct count number based on how that census survey was filled out. Citizen voting age population, which is additional information we get from the census process, is not a direct count number. It is a mathematical estimate, a statistical estimate of the relationship between total population, voting age population, and citizen voting age population. It is the best estimate that we have for estimating those persons within a jurisdiction who are both 18 years of age or older and citizens as of census day, using the survey data over a period of time. And so we use all three of those for different things that we're looking at when we're analyzing how we rebalance population. The first thing we look at that I've talked about is that 10% threshold and being of near equal population across all 9 of your single member districts. We look at total population for that. But for another thing that we look at, which is voting strength of our minority populations, particularly in single member districts when a minority group by itself or in combination with another minority group is over 50% of the population, we look at how strong the citizen voting age population is in comparison with the benchmark, your 2013 map, and make sure there isn't any retrogression, backsliding in that strength of that population, because the Voting Rights Act requires us to. And also for this particular entity, we have a consent decree that requires us to look at that as well. And we'll unpack that a little bit more later. If you'll go to the next slide. So one of the first things we look at when we're looking at census data is we ask ourselves, are our single member districts well balanced? And one way we answer that is by trying to have all of our single member districts of near equal population coming under that 10% threshold, less than a 10% difference between the most populous and least populous single member districts. What we're trying to do is avoid overpopulated and underpopulated districts, but exact equality of population is not required. And why we want to avoid over and underpopulated district is we want the value of a vote to be equivalent for every voter across all single member districts. If you can imagine a pie, two sides of a pie representing perhaps two single member districts, one side of the pie's got 1,000 people living in it. The other side of the pie has 100 people living in it. You'd probably rather be the side of the pie that has 100 people living in it in order to have greater voting strength, because those are very disparate in terms of the population in those two halves of the pie. None of Lone Star College System single member districts are that disparate, but that is an example of why we want to more equalize the population, because we're trying to normalize across your single member district the strength of one vote, what it requires in order to elect a representative. If you'll go to the next slide. So we're going to start now with the demographic change analysis, because as I've telegraphed, the first step in even knowing whether we have to engage in this rebalancing process, the trigger for the process is whether or not our census data indicates that the difference between our most populous single member district and our least populous single member district is 10%, is greater than 10%. Because if it is, we've got to come under that number by redistricting. And so this is the analysis that lets us know whether or not we've hit that trigger. And I am now going to turn this over to one of our demographers, Matthew Cluck, to walk us through the demographic change analysis. And just a little spoiler alert, we are over that 10% threshold, so we do have to redistrict, but I'll allow Matthew to explain why.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I guess first off, though, it's really bad timing. We've got a storm about to hit us real bad, so I apologize if there's any sort of lightning going on or if something happens. So I'll try to be kind of quick. So right here, what you're looking at is just the 2010 census breakdown for Lone Star College District. So broken up into 9 districts here. The table is broken into 4 quadrants. So total population at the top left there, total population percentages at the top right, and then at the bottom you have voting age population and citizen voting age population percentages. So a key thing to look at, right? So our 9-district average in 2010 was 198,134 persons. And then taking the District 9 and District 4, so the highest or the most populated district and then the least populated district, those 2 highlighted cells there, if we take the percent differential of those, we get 7.3%. So that met our criteria of under 10%. So next slide, please. So now if we fast forward 10 years, our 9-district average jumped up to 251,434 persons. And then now, so taking our most and least populous districts, most populous now being District 1, 279,244 persons, and then District 4, a least populace at 202,081 persons, you get a percent differential of 38.2%. So that right there tells us we need to shift some boundaries and redistrict. So next slide, please. All right, so this slide kind of shows the change from 2010 to 2020, the raw net broken down by each district. As you can see right down the middle there, the total column, every district gained population. So all the way up to 77,000 persons in District 1 and District 8. And District 4 gained the fewest at 11,000. But overall, Lone Star College, all the districts gained 476,376 people. So that's quite a big jump, and we'll need some adjusting. All right. So kind of honing in on just District 5, right? This breaks down the fact that from 2010 to 2020, District 5 gained 70,000 people within that 10 years. And looking at population percentages, Anglo population for District 5 went from 75% to 61.8%, and all of the minority population percentages increased there. And then for voting age population percentages, same story, where Anglo voting age population went down within the 10 years. And then same as well for the citizen to voting age populations. Okay. So key takeaways: Lone Star College added overall 476,314 persons from 2010 to 2020. The total district population is now 2,262,847 persons. And the total population differential between the most and least populous single member districts exceeds 10% at 38.2% now. And the most populous district changed from District 9 in 2010 to District 1 in 2020. And in 2010 and 2020, the least populous was District 4. So that remains the same. But yes, so overall, the main takeaway is that redistricting is needed. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So now I want to talk a little bit around the constraints that we have around how we rebalance. We've gone over the census data. It's clear that we're over that 10% threshold at 38.2%. So we have to bring our most populous and least populous single member districts back into balance. Our most populous single member district is SMD 1, single member district 1, and our least populous is single member district number 4. Those two single member districts are not right by each other. So it causes a cascade effect, making one of those single member district 1 smaller in order to make single member district number 4 larger. We can't do that in just one clean step. We actually have to move population amongst a lot of single member districts in order to make that happen. And so that causes a domino or cascade effect throughout the entire system in order to equalize the entire system. And as we're doing that, as we're considering how do we move these boundaries, because there's more than one way to shift boundaries, what are some limitations on our ability to do that? Well, one limitation is a consent decree that was entered into voluntarily by Lone Star College to resolve a lawsuit in 2013. Next slide. So in 2013, the college was sued to go from an at-large system to a single member district system. To resolve that lawsuit, the college agreed to a consent decree, and two of the requirements of that consent decree were about the demographic makeup of three of the college's single member districts. The first constraint was that at least one of the single member districts would have to constitute more than 50% Latino or Hispanic citizen voting age majority. And so that's single member district number 4. In 2013, that was greater than 50% citizen voting age population, Hispanic or Latino. And we have to maintain that under our consent decree. The other requirement is that in addition to that opportunity district on the basis of Latino citizen voting age population, we have to have at least 2 influence districts. And in 2013, that was single member district 3 and single member district 6. And what influence districts are under the decree, as defined under the decree, is when you have African-American and Latino citizen voting age population that is significant. Typically together combining 50% or more. In 2013, that was true of single member district number 2 and single member district number 6. Today, when we look at your census data, single member district number 3 also is included in that. So you have 3 influence districts and an opportunity district. So our constraints on how we rebalance based on the census information is we need to maintain your opportunity district and single member district number 4. And we also need to maintain your influence districts and single member district number 2, 3, and 6. So that limits some of the ways that we can redraw the lines and we can balance population complying with that consent decree. Another limitation on how we can redraw lines and balance population comes from the traditional map drawing principles adopted by the board. And some of them you'll recognize because they incorporate the law in terms of having near equal population or falling under the 10% rule. But let's go over those 9 map drawing principles together. So the first one is to use easily identifiable geographic and political boundaries to be the demarcation or the dividing line between single member districts to the extent possible. The next one is each single member district shall be as nearly as practicable of equal population. And more specifically, criteria number 3 is that the total deviation between the most and least populous district has got to be at or under 10%. So all of those should be familiar to you. Single member district 4 says that the single member districts will be compact. That refers to physical compactness as well as political compactness and composed of contiguous territory. Compactness can refer to the shape of a district, the more geometric it looks, as opposed to having long arms that span north, south, east, and west, the more compact it is. But we don't have to have perfect squares or rectangles. Having just some geometric shape, it can be curved, is okay, but we want to make sure that we're keeping communities together and neighborhoods together of people who have similar interests and similar views on propositions that may appear on a ballot, that it would make sense to keep them in a single member district together. Being contiguous means that there are no holes. Think about a pumpkin and think about if you were carving out a pumpkin and you were carving out the eyes and the nose and the mouth. We don't want any of those holes in our single member districts. Our single member districts need to be continuous and adjacent to one another, meaning that if we took a pencil and started tracing the outer boundaries of our single member districts, we wouldn't have to raise our pencil once, but we would be able to trace those outer boundaries with one contiguous curve of our pen or pencil. Because of the last criteria, which is to use your 2013 plan as the benchmark and not to reinvent the wheel, but only make adjustments to the extent necessary in order to balance population, because that map was both compact and contiguous, your 2 proposed maps are similarly compact and contiguous because we used the 2013 plan as your base plan. The 5th criteria is that to the extent possible, single member districts shall be redrawn to balance population, but that shall also preserve incumbent constituency relations. And what that means in a nutshell is that we're not going to draw any particular trustee out of their district. That is a criteria that is permissible. So we take trustee current residence addresses into account when we are thinking about how we draw our single member district lines. The next criteria number 6, where possible, going back to that political compactness as well as physical compactness criteria, we're going to try to keep communities of interest as defined by the board and as defined by you, the public, together, and neighborhoods together in a single member district, and not have them split across 2 single member districts to the extent possible. We always have to comply with the 10% rule, the near equal population, and our court order. But short of that, we're going to try to keep neighborhoods together and communities of interest together. To be a good election partner on election day with the other entities that have elections on the ballot, so that our voters don't have to go to more than one polling place in order to vote in all of the elections in which they are eligible. We're going to try to avoid splitting county election precincts. Doing that reduces the number of polling places a voter has to go to on election day, and makes it more likely that they only have to go to one because we haven't split a county election precinct. Again, that criteria is subordinate to the court order, and it's subordinate to the 10% rule and near equal population. We have to satisfy those first. And once we satisfy those, then if we can also avoid splitting a county election precinct, we'll do that as well. The next criteria that you have is a general statement of kind of why the court ordered what it ordered in your consent decree, and that is about minority voting strength. If it's possible to draw them as a majority or as an influence in a single member district to allow that group the ability to elect a candidate of its choice under certain circumstances. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act requires us to draw single member districts that achieve that. And specifically, our consent decree requires us to have one opportunity district, single member district 4, on the basis of Hispanic citizen voting age population, and at least 2 influence districts on the basis of the combination of African and American citizen voting age population. And in fact, we have 3 single member districts, 2, 3, and 6. And then, as I telegraphed earlier, the 9th criteria is, to the extent possible, we try to keep what we have, what was approved by the Department of Justice, what was approved by the court as part of the consent decree. We try to stay with that because we know that passes judicial scrutiny, and we only make changes to that 2013 plan to the extent necessary to comply with the other 8 criteria, and most specifically to balance population. So the next step now is to look at the 2 proposed maps. But you, as the public, if you're looking at these maps, here's the order that you should be thinking about what we just talked about. First, does the map bring the difference between the most and least populous district at 10% or under? If it does, then that's a check mark. We've complied with the first criteria. That's the trigger for this process. The next thing to think about if you're the public is, do the 2 proposed maps satisfy the consent decree? Does it maintain our opportunity district, single member district 4, on the basis of Hispanic citizen voting age population? And does it maintain our 3 influence districts, single member districts 2, 3, and 6? If it does, it gets another check mark. And then the remaining criteria are the next things you should consider. So looking at communities of interest, which is where we really need public input, as well as neighborhoods, generally near equal population. Are we using natural boundaries to separate our single member districts? Those would be the things to consider next, those additional criteria. And that's the order that you should be looking at these maps and judging them. Do we satisfy the 10% rule? Do we satisfy our consent decree? And then how well do we satisfy the map drawing principles adopted by the board? So the proposed maps are next, if you'll go to the next slide. And we start with Plan 1, and I'll turn it back over to Matthew if he is still on and not in the middle of a storm.
I'm in the middle of a storm, but I still got power, so we're gonna get it. All right. Yeah, so here's plan one. It's made some pretty decent changes to just about every district. Some more than others, of course. District 6 being the one that bore the brunt of most of the changes, just since it's right in the middle there. And District 5, more specifically, since we're kind of focusing on that one tonight, has two main changes that we can check out on the next few slides. But I think it's best if we just pull up the numbers. So overall, plan one brings it back under 10% there to 9%. So the most populous district is District 9 now in this plan at 260,664 persons, and then District 4 again is the most least populated district at 239,245. So like Lisa was saying, once we get that number under 10%, we also need to make sure we maintain our opportunity district. So that's District 4. If we go to the right side of the District 4 row, they have 71%. So we're well above the 50% majority to maintain opportunity district. So we're all set there. And then for our influence districts, District 2, if we combine the African American and Hispanic citizen voting age population percentages, we get almost 60%. So again, above 50%, the 50% that we're looking for. District 3, we're sitting at a combined 56% between African American and Hispanic. And then the last influence district, District 6, we're at around 52% total between African American and Hispanic. And then for District 5, okay, sorry, I'm a little laggy here. Okay. Yeah, so those are the changes, and the circles are the changes that Plan 1 went through. And then that blue line is the 2010 boundary. So where the color kind of bleeds over into past the blue lines is where the changes are, and then the circles kind of show you better where the changes occur. Next, please. All right, so specifically with District 5, Plan 1, there's two key changes, one right to the north and one right to the south. I think on the next slide, we kind of zoom in on okay, so we're zoomed in on the north. So now our boundary for District 5 is Lake Creek and the West Fork San Jacinto River. So we took some population from District 7 there. So we gained 22,000 persons with that area. Even though we're trying to overall, we need to decrease District 5. For the most part, we still had to kind of cascade and take some from District 7. It's kind of explained with the next change. So right here, District 5 loses a lot of population from District 9. That's Tomball right there. And that was 36,000 people lost. So kind of the net there is around 14,000 people, right? So yeah, the summary of the changes, District 5 gains population from District 7 in the northeast, where the boundary is those two creeks and rivers there. And then District 5 loses population to District 9 in the southeast. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so Plan 2, same overall concept. It's just a different way to rebalance the districts and try to get it under 10%. So this is just kind of another overall shot of it. All right, so once again, the differential between the most and least populous districts is now below that 10% at 9.2%. And different from Plan 1, the most populous district is Plan 2 now, but also District 4 remains that least populated district. And it also remains an opportunity district, which is one of our criteria for the redistricting process. So our citizen voting age population for District 4 stays above 50% at 52.3%. And then also the influence districts 2, 3, and 6 all maintain above 50% when combining African American and Hispanic citizen voting age populations. Next, please. So again, here's kind of the overall snapshot, but you got the circles kind of outlining where the changes are. It looks like we missed a circle on District 5 there, but it's kind of the same concept where we are losing some population in the north and also losing some population in the south. So the overall concept's the same. We want to decrease District 5 from a raw numbers standpoint, because District 5 is not a influence or opportunity district. So we're just looking at the raw totals. All right. So here's the zoomed in of District 5, kind of similar change areas with north and south, those two boundaries. We can kind of zoom in on each of those. So this area, it actually loses some population from 7, kind of the opposite of what Plan 1 was doing towards the north with District 7. It's just kind of another way to look at it. We wanted to give that option. So now the northern boundary is Research, Forest Drive, and it was also Greenbridge Road. So, and it was 11,000 people in that area lost to District 7. So to the south here, losing a bit of Tomball, but not all of Tomball like Plan 1 was. And it's kind of a cleaner boundary with Main Street turning into FM 2920 there. And you're losing 7,539 people to District 9 there. So once again, overall, your overall goal is to just kind of take population from District 5 because it ended up so populous with the new census data. So the summary here, we got single member District 5 lost population to District 7 in the Northeast, and District 5 also lost population to District 9 in the South. All right, so this kind of compares everything, what we looked at all on one page. So starting kind of at the top, each column is either 2010 census, 2020 census, and then Plan 1 and 2 right next to those. So skipping down a little bit to the total population for District 5, comparing all 4 of those numbers. In 2010, the population of District 5 was 202,433 people. Then 2020, of course, it grew to 272,601 persons. So in both plans, we needed to bring it down closer to the average. In Plan 1, we brought it down to 258,716 persons. And in Plan 2, we brought it a little lower to 254,001 persons. Looking at citizen voting age population percentages, it's 82% Anglo in 2010. And in 2020, that decreased a little bit to 76%. And then in plans 1 and 2, it remained pretty close to the same at 78.2% in plan 1, and then 76.1% in plan 2. And for Asian, we don't have that data broken down in 2010 due to limitations with the census then. So in 2020, that was 3.3%, and across the board, it's at 3.3% in plan 1 and plan 2. African-American percentage in 2010 for citizen voting age population was 3.8%, and that increased in 2020 to 6%, and across plans 1 and plan 2, it was 5.3% and 5.9%. Hispanic percentages in 2010 were 9.8%, and that increased to 12.5%. And with plan 1 and plan 2, that was 11.3% and 12.8% respectively. And then the other citizen voting age population percentages stayed at the same across the board, 1.9%.
Is that the end of your presentation, Matthew?
That's it for me.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Before we go to question and answer, just want to make a public call for Trustee David Vogt, if he is online, to either enter chat or raise his hand. This is his single member district meeting, first one scheduled for SMD 5, and just want to make sure that he has an opportunity to participate. So I'll look in participants. We have 14 participants. I do not see Trustee Vogt there. I'm going to chat and raise hand. I do not see anything in chat, and I don't see a raised hand. We'll move to the next item. Question and answer. We'll now open the floor for questions and or comments from the public. If you are physically present, please come to the microphone to speak. If you are online, please use the action icons in Zoom to virtually raise your hand or post your question in the chat to be read aloud. Whether in person or by Zoom, please state your name and the single member district in which you live before stating your question or comment. We will alternate between calling on those in the audience and those participating remotely. I see no one in the audience approaching the podium. Looking at the participants again, forgive me for being repetitive, but I don't see Trustee Vogt. I go over to chat. I see no one in chat. And I see no hands raised. Discussion of timeline and next steps. Ms. McBride, will you present the timeline and next steps, please?
Yes, sir. If you'll go to the next slide. The next 2 slides are the extensive timeline that's been adopted by the board. As you will note, if you go down to January 12th, that is when the board received the census data and the change analysis from the demographer. January 31st, we did a public education on just the law regarding redistricting and that change analysis. And on February 9th, the board considered the initial maps and authorized going out to the community to discuss these initial maps and to get feedback. On March 24th, which is this coming Thursday, the Redistricting Committee will consider the initial feedback from trustees as well as the public on the initial map and make recommendations back to the board, which will be considered by the board on April 13th, at which time the board will authorize another iteration of maps, potentially to go back out to the community that are reflective of the information that we received from the community and the board on this first round. Next slide, please. Then April 21st, we'll have another redistricting committee meeting where the committee will then consider any additional public feedback received to date. We'll continue to have our SMD second round forum meetings with the public and receiving public input at those meetings, as well as online at our redistricting website, so that on May 11th, the board can consider any final comments and make any final changes and narrow those maps down to 1 or 2 maps so that we can have a public hearing on those maps at a centralized location on June 8th. The redistricting committee can take that feedback from all of the community meetings, all of the redistricting committee meetings, all of the board meetings, and anything received online, and make any final tweaks and a final recommendation back to the board, at which time on June 29th, we should be in a position to adopt a final map. So multiple ways to provide public input on the map or maps coming to these individual SMD forums, submitting input online at our redistricting website, as well as coming and speaking either at the redistricting committee meeting or at special board meetings on redistricting. And if you can go to the next slide, if that's possible. And one after that, I'm sorry. So our most immediate next steps is we continually update our website with any information that's disseminated either by the board or the redistricting committee. And that website includes the initial maps and the full presentation provided to the board on the changes under both map 1 and map 2 to every single member district, including specifically single member district number 5. And then we, over the next couple of weeks, will be wrapping up this first round of single member district meetings. If you'll go to the next slide, this is the complete list of round 1 meetings. They started February 16th and will end on April 6th. And then we'll have a second round of meetings based on any additional recommendations made by the board and the redistricting committee that take into account your public feedback as well as trustee feedback. And those second round of redistricting meetings, community meetings, start on April 18th and they end on May 3rd, remembering that June 29th is our target date for final adoption of a map after our public hearing on June 8th. If you'll go to the next slide. Really great information maintained up to date regarding redistricting, including all the presentations made to the board, made to the committee, and how to find your community meeting, either in round 1 or round 2, are at this website, which is www.lonestar.edu/redistricting. And remember that on that website, if you can't make it to a special board meeting on redistricting or to one of the committee meetings or to one of the community meetings, you can always provide your written feedback on the redistricting website. We continue to have that open to receive that feedback. It comes to us as the redistricting lawyers and the demographers, and we provide that to the board at both their board meetings and at their redistricting committee meetings. So please access your community meetings or access the website or come to a board meeting, come to a redistricting committee, because we really want to hear from you. Thank you so much, Trustee Sullivan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. McBride. IT just sent me a text and said that this was not recorded, so you'll have to present all of this again. That's a joke. I'm sorry. Oh, it's been a long day.
You got IT.
Yeah, right. No, thank you, Ms. Bride. I'd like to thank all our presenters tonight, and especially Ms. McBride. And a special thank you to LSC Montgomery President Rebecca Riley for hosting tonight. We appreciate it. Also, thanks again to OTS and Lone Star Police Department for showing up at all of these events and making it possible for me to run the meeting regardless where I am in the country or if I'm actually in the district. So great job, everyone. With no further business to discuss, this public education forum is now adjourned at 6:53 p.m. on March 21st. 2022. The next special meeting on redistricting is on April 13th, 2022. The redistricting committee will hold a meeting on March 24th, 2022, which is this Thursday. That meeting begins at 5 p.m. Will be available for public, will be available to see in public and virtually as well. Being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.